on the virtues and vices.
Rug pull.
Without the actual slides, which I'll have access to in front of me, but you won't. So, but yeah, I'm always glad to be here with you guys. I think the first year we did this, Preston Fish was here, and he told me afterwards, these are my people, right? And I understood what it meant, right? You guys are my people. You're Bitcoiners, you understand stuff, but you're also followers of Preston. And that's a very important part of who we are, and it's a joy for me to be with you. So, my talk today is on the virtues and vices of Bitcoin. It's been slightly modified. I did give it, so I am reusing it. But it was given in Switzerland 2 years ago, so hopefully none of you were there. If you were, I'm sorry. Still get something out of it. But it's about the many ways in which people fail and the one way to succeed. And this is very much akin to the narrow path versus the broad and line path. There are so many ways to fail, but really only one way to succeed. I've seen this as different. So, what we're going to talk about today are virtues and vices. And if you've read New Christianity, you would know this list. This is the 4 cardinal virtues: prudence, fortitude, justice, and temperance. And then the 3 theological virtues: faith, hopelessness. We're going to be talking about all of these in the context of what Aristotle would call the moderate between the extremes. So vices in Aristotle's view are too little of something and too much of something. And virtues sort of sit in the middle, the moderate difference. So for example, you have prudence, which is a virtue. The lack of any of it would be ignorance, and too much of it would be arrogance. So prudence as sort of like the midway point between ignorance and arrogance. But also, you know, in a sense, ignorance and arrogance are both kind of subset here. And prudence is sort of that middle that is more godly, like that's part of virtue. Similarly, fortitude is the midpoint between cowardice on one end and recklessness on the other. Justice is license on one hand and despotism on the other. Temperance is deprivation on the one hand, indulgence on the other. Faith is unbelief on one hand and gullibility on the other. Hope is despair on one hand, fantasy on the other. Love is indifference on one hand and obsession on the other. So don't worry if you don't remember all this. I'll be talking about each of these. And this is where it would be very nice if this is up on the screen. Anyway, let's talk about prudence first of all. And it is what is prudence? Prudence is wisdom. It's planning for the future. It's what we in Bitcoin call low time preference. And there are 2 ways you can kind of go wrong with prudence when it comes to Bitcoin. One is ignorance, or a lack of interest or knowledge about money in general. And we see this a lot in the church, where people just aren't interested. It's like, well, Bitcoin, whatever, like money and finance has nothing to do with me. Actually, it does, right? Everything has to do with it because sin can enter in that way. And oftentimes you see ignorance as a vice that a lot of no-coiners practice because they don't want to learn about it. They're not interested. They don't think it applies to them. The other end is arrogance. And this is thinking that you know more than you actually do, and oftentimes seeing things only through one lens. And this often happens as well, where you think you know and understand everything about money, and therefore you think, okay, well, this is a better money by making it into an alternate or something like that. And this often also happens with a lot of people, where they get into, instead of prudence, and not ignorance, but they go into the other direction with arrogance. The virtuous part is to learn and walk humbly, right? And that's where you find sort of that sweet spot, where you're not ignoring the thing, but you're also making sure that you're going with the right, walking humbly and understanding that there is real virtue that is possible within this realm. All right, so that's the first virtue, prudence, and it's the midpoint between ignorance and arrogance. The second one is fortitude, and that's the midpoint between cowardice and recklessness. So fortitude is doing really hard things, okay, and not letting fear stop you, what we would call courage. And one end of it is cowardice. It's just not doing anything because of fear. And again, we see this very often in the church, where people don't want to get into something. They might even understand, right? They might have some prudence where they understand something is wrong with the financial system and they're interested in it. But because of cowardice, they don't get into it, and they stay no winners as a result. The other end is recklessness, and this often happens when you have too much of that, where you get into degenerate gambling because you like the action, where that's the thing that makes you feel alive. And that's the path of the all-winners, right? And fortitude is sort of that happy middle where you are courageous, but you're also not reckless. And the key thing to remember there is that you need to fear God and not men. A lot of people fear losing, so they become cowards as a result of that. And at the same time, or on the other end of it, they like the action and they're addicted to the action, so they become reckless. All right, third cardinal virtue is justice, and this is a midpoint between license and despotism. Justice is doing the right or good thing and providing value to the market. Now, on one hand, it is the one way in which you can be an extreme on justice is license, right? It's rent seeking or scamming. It's thinking that everything is okay. So you end up either no pointer that is in a rent seeking position, not feeling at all guilty about taking money from people who are really essentially doing nothing, or being an all pointer and scamming people and not feeling bad about it either. So that's one extreme of justice. The other extreme of justice is despotism. It is trying to get everybody on board with this in a very centralized way. It's telling people you need to do this, and this is what you have to do, and trying to force them into it, and not recognizing that they have their own will and that they have their own free will to do so. And this is where justice is sort of avoiding two ends. It's avoiding greed on one end and avoiding controlling others on the other. The fourth cardinal virtue is temperance. And this the two extremes there are deprivation and indulgence. For temperance, temperance is just doing things the right way, not too little, not too much. It's just doing it exactly. And really, when we're talking about all of these virtues and talking about the extremes and virtue being in the middle, everything is, in a sense, a part of temperance. But in particular, with respect to Bitcoin, it's a lot of people are in that camp of deprivation, where, for example, you've probably heard this often. People haven't bought. Why? Because they're waiting for the dip. Right? And then when the dip comes, what do? They're like, oh, it'll go down further, so I'll wait for the dip again. And they end up no pointers because they never buy, because they're always waiting for the dip, right? They're always waiting for something to go back down. And they're always looking for that deal, but when the time comes, they never really act on it. On the other end is indulgence, and this is people that do too much of it. And this too, you've probably seen, where people leverage, right? They go 2, 3, 5, 10x leverage and try to make more money back. catch up to you, right? When they're that's why they're waiting for the bid, because they're comparing themselves. They want to catch up, and this is why they also get call pointers or leverage trading, because they see you've been in it 5 years longer than they have, and for them, they're like, okay, well, how do I catch up? They're playing a different status game, and that causes them to not be temperate instead of walking more humbly. So those are the cardinal virtues: prudence, fortitude, justice, and temperance. Let's go into the more theological virtues: faith. And faith is the midpoint between unbelief and gullibility. And you've definitely seen this as well. Faith is holding onto your rationally derived belief and acting accordingly, even in the face of odds, where you see a lot of maybe convincing arguments, but you've already sort of determined using your own rational beliefs, logic, and arguments. But something sounds convincing, it's very rhetorically convincing, you have social pressure, things like that. In the face of all of that, holding on to the beliefs that you already have. One end of it is unbelief, refusing to see all evidence of something. In the case of Bitcoin, it's the people like on r1coin, right? Have you heard about the subreddit? Who knows about r1coin? Okay, maybe a couple people. All right. So r1coin was created in 2011 by some people that thought Bitcoin was ridiculous, and I think it was literally created by David Omar, who edits Wikipedia and stuff. But anyway, for 15 years, they've been making fun of Bitcoiners, saying, "Oh, it's Floodcoin, right? It's not worth anything or whatever." 15 years. They started when Bitcoin was at $1. Through all of that, they just kind of refused to see if there's any merit in Bitcoin itself. That's sort of like the level of unbelief. And I'm sure you've seen this in the Christian context. There are certain types of atheists. Whatever evidence you show them is not good enough. The goalpost is always moving, right? And that's a level of unbelief that is actually wise. The other end of it is gullibility. It's believing whatever you want to. And this often happens with altcoiners, where they will create a narrative that their altcoin is going to be successful. They'll believe almost anything because they want to believe it, rather than whether it's true or not. And that's also the key there to faith in this life, as in Christianity and also Bitcoin, is to develop that conviction. And that means actually studying and learning and knowing what it is, and not being susceptible to social pressure or rhetoric or whatever you're trying to believe. So that's faith. The second theological virtue is hope, and that is sort of like the midpoint between despair and faith. Hope, theologically speaking, is it's working towards a future that is not just optimistic but realistic and evident. On the one hand, there are people who despair, right? And the prototypical example for me is somebody like Whitney Webb. Who knows who Whitney Webb is? Okay, a few of you. But she's like a serious doomer, right? She thinks everything is taken over by the CIA, the mob, what have you. And her contention about Bitcoin in particular is that it's already been taken over by the government. It's completely compromised. She doesn't necessarily have evidence. It's just that's sort of like the despair, or that she just refuses to believe any good news. If you have friends, I'm sure some of you have friends like this who can't ever be convinced that things are going right. They can't ever get used to winning. Right? They don't know how to win. If something good happens to them, they think, oh, shoe's gonna drop or whatever, and they just don't have the mental makeup to hold Bitcoin because you win too much. It's almost always something bad's gonna happen. That's despair. On the other hand, on the other extreme is fantasy. It's thinking that the world will become whatever you want it to be, right? It's thinking that the world will pump anything you sufficiently market. So of course, a lot of those people go follow this, thinking, okay, well, this, I have a lot of hope, right? This new coin is going to capture everyone's imagination because enough people are behind it, or enough money is behind it, or because of this or that. But it's fantasy. It's not based in reality. Neither is despair. Right? And this is the thing about hope. Is that it really is much more realistic than the other two things. And the thing to note about both despair and fantasy is that they're ultimately rooted somewhat in laziness. Right? If you are in despair, then it's much easier to say, all hope is lost, I don't have to do anything. Or if you are in sort of like this fantasy land, then I don't have to do anything. I don't have to actually examine all of my beliefs or how things actually behave. Final theological virtue is love, and that is the midpoint between indifference and obsession. And love is acting with compassion so that others benefit. And the two extremes are, as you might expect, very self-centered. So first is indifference. It is being selfish and monetizing. I'm sure you've seen this in all places. But you see this nowadays almost everywhere. I don't have a Facebook account anymore, but I did scroll through my wife's Facebook account sometime back. And it's not like 2008. Right? If you scroll through Facebook in 2008, it was actual status updates from your friends. But nowadays, not only do you have ads, and even if you have some sort of ad blocker, a lot of her friends are selling things to their friends, right? And I'm sure you've heard of like the vitamins and the leggings and things like that. Right? Like they're selling stuff to their friends. What is that? It's monetizing your friendships, right? It's taking your relationships and making profit out of them. That's a profound indifference to their own, to those people, right? And it's not really thinking about love. That's an indifference. Now, also on Facebook is the other extreme, which is obsession. It is caring way too much about what other people think, and and in doing so, it's sort of like moderating. And this is another reason why a lot of people don't get into Bitcoin, right? It's what are other people going to think? They're going to think I'm some crazy libertarian psycho, right? Instead of actually thinking about what it is and how it's supposed to touch you, they think too much about what other people think of them. And this happens on Facebook all the time as well, because the image you put out into the world is what you're trying to manage, because you're more obsessed with what they think of you rather than what others. And ultimately, that's what love requires, is a focus on God, because He's the only one that can keep you. Right? If you're focused on yourself in any way, you're either going to be so selfish as to be indifferent to the suffering of others, or you're going to be so obsessed with their opinion and bringing up your status that you're not going to be thinking about what love actually is. So my message to you today is to cultivate these virtues. Right? It's hard to think about a lot of them, but in a sense, when you have something real like Bitcoin, it makes focusing and understanding these virtues a lot easier, because you can see the extremes in a particular area, and you can see the vices that you can't fall into. So to be more prudent, learn, right? You need to go do the work, and you need to be humble about what it is that you know. And have courage, but don't be reckless. Right? Be just to other people, and that need for faith and focus on God so that you can truly love your neighbor. Those are the virtues and vices of Bitcoin. Hopefully that's useful to you. I know for myself, this is one of the surprising things about Bitcoin is that it's actually made me a better Christian. You wouldn't think that, but how does getting into Bitcoin make you a better Christian? But in a sense, the minute you step outside of the social norms and things, you find yourself sort of isolated a little bit. And that in itself is a refining fire. So that's it.
We're going to jump right into our other speakers. So, Robert Bortons. How many of you guys are familiar with Robert Bortons? He's done. All right, again, your minds are going to be blown. You're like, I can't do it.